To those of you who are joining us, welcome to AMWA After Hours, Emil Bisttram, Musicality through Abstraction. My name is Claire and I will be your presenter this evening. The entire program will last for about 45 minutes. I will lecture for about 30 of those and then leave the last 15 minutes for questions. If you have any questions, please post them in the chat and I will get to them at the end of the lecture. Emil Bisttram was an artist who spent much of his life and career in Taos, New Mexico. He moved to Taos from New York City in the 1930s and brought a sense of artistic experimentation and abstraction with him. In 1975, the Anschutz collection acquired over 200 works on paper directly from the artist. As part of the acquisition, Bisttram wrote out his inspiration and thoughts behind these works on paper, as well as several other paintings already in the Anschutz collection. Most of these works are in storage at the American Museum of Western Art, and I am excited to show a selection of these works and Bisttram's writings on those selected works with you tonight. This program features selected works by Bisttram, organized around the theme Musicality through Abstraction. For these selected works, Bisttram drew heavily on music and sound to create his visuals. Some of that auditory inspiration and influence is very evident in the work itself, while with other selections, Bisttram's writing about the piece helped connect it to the theme of musicality through abstraction. Throughout his career, Bisttram experimented with abstract and non-objective visuals. The Tate defines abstract art as, quote, art that does not attempt to represent an accurate depiction of a visual reality, but instead uses shapes, colors, forms, and gestural marks to achieve this effect. The word abstract, strictly speaking, means to separate or withdraw something from something else. Abstract art is art which is not representational. It could be based on a subject or may have no source at all in the external world. Bisttram experimented with different levels of abstraction in his art. Some pieces, like Comadre Rafaelita on the left, are very representative of physical figures, while other pieces, like abstracted still life composition on the right, and most of what we will look at this evening, are not very representational. Abstraction is seen in Western art. Abstraction, as seen in Western art, was part of the rise of modernism in the 1900s, the Tate defining modernism as, quote, the broad movement in Western arts and literature, characterized by a deliberate rejection of the styles of the past, emphasizing instead innovation and experimentation in forms, materials, and techniques in order to create artworks that better reflected modern society, end quote. And Bisttram was very much about experimenting in forms, materials, and techniques, as we will see. Now a bit more about Bisttram himself. He was born April 7th, 1895 as Emil James Bisttram in Hungary. In 1906, he and his family immigrated to the United States and settled in New York City. Early on in childhood, Bisttram displayed an interest in art and felt a need to paint and create. His parents encouraged him to be a tradesman, seeing more money in craft than in creation of fine art. As a teen, Bisttram worked a number of odd jobs to help support his family, including as an amateur boxer nicknamed Battling Bennett. In 1918, Bisttram began formally studying art. He took night classes at the National Academy of Design under Ivan Olinsky, Parsons School of Art and Design under J. Hambidge and Howard Giles, at the Art Students League under Leon Kroll, pictured here, and at the Cooper Union under William Gillespie Dodge, pictured here. Hambidge and Giles especially, his teachers at the Art Students League, were particularly influential on Bisttram by teaching him about dynamic symmetry, a theory for creating balanced compositions in art. J. Hambidge was the theory's main proponent in the early 1900s. According to Hambidge, dynamic symmetry was developed by ancient Greek and Egyptian artists and used primarily in the construction of architecture. Hambidge rediscovered this theory around the start of the 20th century and began teaching and lecturing on it. The theory structured the composition of a work based on the shape of the objects in the work and their relationship to one another, based on a framework of diagonals, right angles, and other geometric forms. There was a lot of math involved with this type of composition, a lot of figuring out ratios from one object or point in a composition with another. Personally, it's a little over my head, but Bisttram really embraced this theory. He incorporated dynamic symmetry in almost all of his work, regardless of medium or degree of abstraction. In Arizona landscape, we can see penciled grid lines under the image. We can also see how the arms of the abstracted cactus meet certain grid lines to appear harmoniously still part of the cactus, even if they do not always grow from the plant's trunk, as the arms of a cactus would in a more representational work. 1918 was also the year that Bisttram changed the spelling of his last name from Bisttran, as in B-I-S-T-R-A-N, to Bisttram, B-I-S-T-T-R-A-M, at the recommendation of a numerologist. Numerologists seek the occult significance of numbers, and I suppose in this particular case, they also take into consideration the occult significance of how many times letters appear in a certain name. In 1919, Bisttram started working as a commercial artist, creating works for advertisements. He and some of his art student friends founded a freelance art advertising agency. 1919 was also the year he met and married Marion. They met as students at Parsons School of Design. Bisttram started his teaching career at Parsons School of Design, where he taught from 1920 to 1925. He also taught at the Master Institute of United Arts in New York City from 1921 to 1931. The Master Institute of United Arts was founded by Nicholas Konstantin Roerich, a painter, writer, archaeologist, mystic, philosopher, and educator originally from Russia. Roerich was a huge influence on Bisttram and believed in depicting spirituality and other non-tangible ideas in visual art. The Master Institute offered classes in many artistic mediums, such as visual, musical, and dance, and encouraged students to study many artistic and intellectual fields. This association between multiple art forms plays into the theme of musicality through abstraction, as demonstrated in this piece, It's Music. Bisttram wrote about this piece, quote, "Study in colored crayon and pencil. I look at it and try to recall just why I did it and what caused me to do it in this particular way. This one was done in 1942. That's a long time ago. However, as I recall, I was listening to a recording of a piece of music, and it occurred to me that it was all going on right inside. And I wanted to see if I could put it down on paper in the shape of a face and head and reinterpret the notes as I felt them in color and shapes, creating one whole composition. It is not easy to interpret music as a painting or visual art, where the music is a rhythm in time, while a visual art is rhythms in space. Actually, it doesn't necessarily mean that I was copying this music. I was trying to create a design or color scheme that would remind one of the music, as it has done for me." In this piece, Bisttram was trying to visually convey an auditory art form, music, into a color scheme and pattern expressed visually, in this case, in pencil on paper. Roerich was a great mentor to Bisttram, influencing the younger artist in creating and teaching art as well as spiritually. In art, Roerich advised learning about and experiencing multiple art forms, regardless of the mediums one particular artist used. Roerich himself often related music to use of color and color harmonies, as did Bisttram in drawings like Sounds in the Head No. 2. Bisttram wrote about this work, quote, "This is a handsome color scheme for several works that I did of Sounds in the Head. When you listen to music, if you are to sit quietly, you will find the sounds all moving and all are really being accepted and understood in the consciousness. That is the idea that I have created in a shape that appears to be a head. This is composition No. 2, end quote. Roerich was also potentially the one who suggested Bisttram travel to Taos, New Mexico. The summer of 1930 was the first time Bisttram ventured west, where he rented studio space for about 3 months and traveled in and around Taos, trying to paint what he saw in awe of the area's grandeur and seemingly limitless space, and the quality of life there. He did not complete many artworks during this initial visit before returning to New York. In 1931, Bisttram received a Guggenheim Fellowship to fund his study of fresco-style mural painting, which is painting onto freshly laid, still wet plaster. He initially intended to go to Italy, but due to the tense political situation in Italy at the time, he traveled instead to Mexico City, Mexico, to study under Diego Rivera. While in Mexico, Bisttram's wife, Marian, and her mother stayed in Taos, and Bisttram joined them after his fellowship. The Bisttram family settled in Taos after that, where both Emil and Marian became active in the art community there. Over his life in Taos, Bisttram taught art, co-founded an artist group, and helped establish several art galleries. In 1932, Bisttram continued his teaching work, founding the Taos School of Art, renamed the Bisttram School of Art in 1943, where he taught drawing and painting. He incorporated much of what he had learned from his educational experiences in New York City into his Taos school. This included teaching dynamic symmetry, which he first learned at Parsons, and hosting lectures and performances of multiple art forms similar to the multidisciplinary approach of the Master Institute of United Arts. Dynamic symmetry was the basis of art education at Bisttram's school, and as the artist experimented with abstraction, he encouraged his students to do the same. He was known for expecting a lot of effort and dedication from his students, and sometimes pushed them into abstraction even when they were not so stylistically inclined. Bisttram's experimental art and lectures on dynamic symmetry were not initially well received by the more representational and artistically conservative artists in Taos. Eventually, some of them, like Ernest Blumenschein, came around, at least socially, if not exactly stylistically. In 1933, Bisttram founded the Heptagon Gallery. This was the first commercial gallery in Taos that focused on selling fine art, beyond indigenous art and artifacts or tourist souvenirs. Part of Bisttram venturing into displaying and selling art was financial need. During the Great Depression, many Americans, including artists, struggled to make ends meet. Bisttram did so through teaching these gallery ventures and participating in government-funded art programs. Bisttram and other local artists received commissions through the Federal Treasury Relief Art Project. And from 1933 to 1934, Bisttram served as the New Mexico organizer for that program. In 1938, Bisttram and Raymond Johnson co-founded the Transcendental Painting Group. In existence from 1938 to 1941, the aim of the group, according to its manifesto, was, quote, to carry painting beyond the appearance of the physical world through new concepts of space, color, light, and design to imaginative realms that are idealistic and spiritual, end quote. The group also included Ed Garman, Robert Gribroek, Lauren Harris, Florence Miller, William Lumpkins, Agnes Pelton, Horace Towner Pierce, and Stuart Walker. Robert Gribroek Florence Miller, and Horace Towner Pierce were students of Bisstram's at the Taos School of Art. All members of the Transcendental Painting Group created artwork in modern styles, focusing on experimenting with abstraction. This type of work did not necessarily sell well in the late 1930s. Representational, regional, and social realist works were more popular. As a group, the artists could more effectively organize and publicize shows of their art and the virtues they saw in their particular aesthetics, and potentially sell more works, having more of a chance at success of doing so than they would have as individual artists. The idea of transcending the physical world is seen in some of Bisstram's works incorporating sound, such as Symphony in Blue. Bisstram wrote about this piece, quote, "You notice that this is floating out in open space above the planet. Music, particularly symphonic music or organ music, played in a building, such as a church, or at the symphony, and a clairvoyant looks up into outer space and sees it above the building, slowly moving out as vibrations of color. This is another attempt to hold it within a composition and desired size. Here Bisstram talks of and tries to visualize music floating above the earth pictured in the lower left of the painting. He refers to how a clairvoyant may experience music differently, seeing or hearing more transcendent aspects of the art. We also see in this piece and Bisstram's writing on how his spiritual beliefs played into his artwork. Bisstram's spiritual beliefs were multifaceted and not limited to one particular organized religion. He incorporated these beliefs into all aspects of his life, evidenced early on when he changed the spelling of his last name at the recommendation of a numerologist. He was interested in theosophy, as was his mentor Nicholas Roerich and other members of the Transcendental Painting Group. Theosophy was a spiritual movement founded by H.P. Blavatsky that revived, reinterpreted, and intermixed more mystical and esoteric teachings from Buddhism, Hinduism, Judaism, and Christianity. It was very popular in the 1920s, and many theories and teachings that were developed or became popular during this time and after transitioned into what we might consider New Age today under a very, very grand umbrella. Bisstram saw similar connection to spiritualism and art in the artwork of Native Americans in the Southwest. He saw abstracted or non-figurative motifs in Indigenous paintings, similar to what he was trying to accomplish. He was also influenced by the emphasis many Indigenous artists put on the process of creating an artwork, not just on the end result of the artwork itself. On Native American painting, Bisstram remarked, quote, "They were never permitted to paint anything realistic. They were painting ideas, something to do with the spirit of man's inner nature, the spirit of trees, the spirit of animals, the spirit of the sky, the spirit of the rain, all symbolic paintings, beautifully done. Though maybe a little simplistic to attempt to summarize all Indigenous painting, this quote emphasizes Bisstram's emphasis on portraying the non-tangible, like spirit and sound, visually. In Planetary Sounds, we see non-figurative geographic motifs and patterning similar to patterns found in Southwestern Indigenous artworks. Perhaps this is an attempt by Bisstram to paint the spirit of a planet opposed to a representational image of a planet, as he interpreted Native American painters did. The artist's comments on this painting are relatively brief. Quote, "Another one of the musical themes created in 1942 in pencil and crayon. I think it has great potential for a beautiful painting, but never did get to it," end quote. Another influence on Bisstram was the art of Vasily Kandinsky, credited as one of the first European artists to create a fully abstract painting. Bisstram had read Kandinsky's book entitled On the Spiritual in Art, and drew from it in his approach to creating art. Both artists believed that spirituality and creativity were intertwined. Kandinsky wrote about how all physical entities had spiritual archetypes, and Bisttram found abstraction an effective way to identify and visually convey these archetypes. Kandinsky was also very influenced by music, and like Bisttram, tried to recreate the same non-objective, transcendent nature of music in his visual paintings. Bisttram alludes to attempting to capture the qualities of sound or music visually in many of his comments on particular pieces, such as musical theme number 9. He wrote about this piece, quote, "Whenever an artist is creating a non-objective work from a musical theme and he doesn't know what to call it, he calls it a number. It is actually an arrangement of sounds overlapping one another. It could be even the tuning of an orchestra or of 4 instruments," end quote. Bisttram mentions the term non-objective in this comment. Non-objective art is defined as, quote, "a type of abstract art that is usually, but not always, geometric and aims to convey a sense of simplicity and purity," end quote. I'm not so sure I would call this particular piece simple or pure, but it gets to the driver of what non-objective art is and what Bisttram was usually trying to convey in his more experimental pieces. Bisstram's non-objective pieces contain examples with geometric forms, like symphonic composition, on which he wrote, quote, "a very interesting arrangement of forms, trying to illustrate the words symphonic composition," end quote. Oh, no, the quote is still going. I'll start over. "A very interesting arrangement of forms, trying to illustrate the words symphonic composition. I did not make a study of oil on it since this sketch was made in 1942. I probably did the other 10 years later, about 1952, end quote. Many of his other works are more organic, less geometric forms, as seen in lyrical notes, on which he commented, quote, "Another musical theme playing with curvilinear movements, rhythms enclosed. Again, one of the experiments trying to express a musical theme in visual patterns of shapes and color," end quote. Both of these works aim to show visually what music can look like. Symphonic composition focuses on a specific type of music, and the visual focus is on line and shape. The piece is almost monochromatic. With lyrical notes, Bisttram does not specify the type of music he is trying to convey, but he aims to convey it more through color and shape than line and angle. Similar to symphonic composition in trying to capture a particular type of music is the very visually different syncopated rhythm number 2. In music, syncopation involves combining a variety of rhythms, seemingly making a song offbeat. Bisttram captures the auditory complexity and chaos in this work, writing, quote, "In this study, my intention was to express the idea that musical rhythms are in time with painting rhythms. I also want you to notice that the composition is moving from lower left to upper right, which in the artistic language is called the lyric direction. It's a cheerful and happy direction. If the same composition were moving from upper left to lower right, it would have a dramatic or sad or bitter feeling. It would be ominous and very dramatic. Therefore, that is the purpose of making this composition move from left to right. The color you will notice is red. I left it that way because I've tried a number of colors, and I felt that this one expressed the idea of this particular composition best. Use your own imagination and see if you can feel and sense the same kind of rhythm I have felt in using the words syncopated rhythm," end quote. Though Bisttram did usually aim for non-objective forms in his work, he did continue to paint representational work because it sold better. His work ran the gamut from fully representational to fully non-objective, with some pieces in between, containing forms abstracted from physical objects in the external world. For example, pieces like Sound of a Saxophone and Sounds in the Head show somewhat recognizable forms. sound of the saxophone contains an abstracted treble clef, a symbol used in writing music, in the lower right of the drawing. We also see abstracted elements of the saxophone itself in the straight lines in the middle, the neck of the instrument, connecting with the curved bell at the bottom of the instrument, though in the drawing, there are curves at both the bottom and the top of the form. Bisttram wrote about this piece, quote, "Another musical interpretation created in 1942. Sometimes when I look at these things, I wonder what and how I was able to organize these shapes in such ways, attempting to express sound," end quote. Abstraction, like most forms of art, is very much left to interpretation. Even the own artist's interpretation might change from when Bisttram created this work in 1942 to when he wrote about this work in 1975. With sounds in the head, we see the shape of a head in the center of the drawing, and the resemblance of facial features such as an eye, a nose, and a mouth. Bisttram wrote about this piece, quote, "Another one of those studies that I wasn't pleased with. Notice that the rhythms in this one are quite different from the others that are more enclosed in the head. Certainly the sound in a head while listening to music are different from the sounds in your head when you have a headache," end quote. I am not sure if this piece visualizes listening to music or a headache, but based on Bisttram's comments and him not being pleased with it, this drawing probably depicts the sounds and sensations of a headache opposed to music. While some of Bisttram's musically abstract works have recognizable forms, the majority of them are fully non-objective, whether trying to visualize a particular type of music, like symphony in blue, illustrating blues music, as Bisttram indicates in his comment, quote, "An arrangement of shapes that give you a sense of many symphonic notes of a blues composition," end quote. Or if his works were capturing music in general, like with musical theme number 7, on which he wrote, quote, "A dramatized variation of a musical theme. Notice the weight at the bottom, going from dark to light, but returning upon itself to create unity. It is a large painting and has been exhibited quite often in California. I painted a sketch in 1942 in crayon, and I painted a large painting in 1951, end quote. And this piece in the Anschutz collection is that sketch in crayon and pencil that Bisttram mentions, not the finished oil from 1950. Many of these works in paper, small in size, and utilizing inexpensive materials like pencil or crayon opposed to oil paint, were experiments and explorations in combining and conveying one sense, sound, through another sense, sight. As Bisttram often mentions in his comments, he thought some works were more successful than others. The more successful ones, like musical theme number 7, were used as references for later, larger oil paintings, while others were probably put away and only seen again once they were acquired by the Anschutz collection. Having such a large collection of Bisttram's works in one place and his writings on those works give valuable insights into his artistic process, inspirations, and self-reflection. All right, well, thank you all for listening. Again, thank you all for joining. Be sure to check out our next AMWA After Hours program. It's on Thursday, May 26th, and it's American Regionalism, Views of the Midwest. And yeah, you can always view past programs through our YouTube channel by searching American Museum of Western Art on YouTube. Thank you and good night, everyone.